Mr. John, the principal said. We don't have any teacher by that name here. The girls felt their world crumble. How could no one remember Mr. John, our mathematics teacher? Mathematics teacher. That position has been vacant for months now, the principal said. Brightway High School was the best school in Abuja, where only the richest families sent their children to. Among the students were 3 girls who everyone feared: Binta, Janet, and Patricia. These girls were not just popular because of their beauty. They were untouchable because their parents were the biggest shareholders in the school. Binta was the bold and confident one. Janet was quiet but cunning, and Patricia was the bubbly one who always had a trick up her sleeve. Together, they were unstoppable. No one dares question them. The teachers feared them because their parents' influence meant no one dared to punish them. They used their beauty and influence to always deal with teachers with the game they call seduction. Binta, Janet, and Patricia were known not just for their beauty, but for their mischievous game. They pretended to be innocent victims of harassment, spreading false rumors that ultimately got their targets fired or disgraced whenever the male teacher refuses to sleep with them. It was all a fun to them. To them, this was a way to show how powerful they are and also get back at teachers they don't like or those that didn't do their biddings. How they operated. Their plans were always carefully crafted. Each girl played a specific role in their schemes. Benita had a way of drawing people in with her charm and confidence. She would start the game by seeking extra attention from the teacher. She stayed back after class, asking for help with her studies or sharing a made-up problem at home. She would act overly friendly, laughing at their jokes, and creating a sense of trust. Once the teacher seems comfortable around her, she'd subtly push boundaries, standing too close, trying to seduce them, or complimenting them in a way that seemed innocent, but carried hidden intent. Janet acted as the witness. Janet played the role of the reliable friend who saw everything. When Benita claimed that a teacher was acting inappropriately, Janet would back her up, saying she witnessed the scene. She had a way of telling convincing lies, adding just enough detail to make the story believable. I saw him holding her hand in the staff room, she would say. He even asked her to stay behind after class yesterday. Who knows what he's planning? Patricia was the gossip among them. She was the master of spreading rumors. She would whisper their fabricated stories to other students, knowing how fast gossip traveled in school, most especially when posted in their school channel. Soon, the whole school would be talking about how the teacher had harassed Benita. Once the rumors reached the school administration, the teacher would be summoned for questioning. With no solid proof to defend themselves, and the girls' stories aligning perfectly, most teachers had no choice but to resign to avoid further embarrassment. To them, it was just fun. But one day, a new teacher named Mr. John came to Brightway High, and their lives changed forever. Mr. John was everything the girls found attractive. He was tall, dark, and charming. He carried himself with confidence and has a way of making everyone feel comfortable around him. The girls immediately noticed him and began planning their next move. "Have you seen the new mathematics teacher?" Patricia said, sitting with her friends during lunch. "Yes," Patricia replied, her eyes glinting with excitement. "He's handsome." Janet smirked. "Let's see who gets his attention first." But unlike their past games, none of the girls told the others about their plans. because they all wanted him to themselves and they were determined to win his heart. To each of them, Mr. John was a bait that would last for a lifetime. They separately wanted him for something more than games. Little did they know that their secret competition would lead to something they could never have imagined. Benita was the first to make her move. One Friday afternoon, after most of the students had gone home, she stayed back in the classroom, pretending to need help with her mathematics assignment. "Sir," she said, approaching Mr. John's desk, "I'm struggling with this assignment. Can you help me?" Mr. John looked up from his papers and smiled. "Of course, Benita, sit down." As he explained how to solve the mathematics assignment, Benita leaned closer, letting her hand brush against his arm. "You're such a good teacher, sir," she said softly. Mr. John glanced at her, his smile widening. "You're a smart girl. You don't need my help. You just like the attention." Benita's heart skipped a beat. "Yes, I do," she admitted, lowering her gaze. Mr. John chuckled and leaned back in his chair. "You're bold. I like that." The atmosphere in the room shifted. Benita felt a spark between them, and before she knew it, she was leaning in closer. Mr. John didn't stop her, and that moment changed everything for her. She finally slept with Mr. John in the staff room. When she left the classroom that evening, she felt like she was walking on air. She didn't tell anyone about what had happened. It was her secret, and she planned to keep it that way. Janet's opportunity came a week later. She found Mr. John sitting alone in the school library, reading a book. She approached him, holding a book in her hand. "Sir, do you mind if I sit here?" she asked, her voice soft and sweet. "Not at all," Mr. John replied, gesturing to sit on the chair across from him. Janet sat down and pretended to be reading, but her eyes kept drifting to Mr. John. After a few minutes, she spoke. "Sir, can I ask you something personal?" Mr. John looked up, intrigued. "Go ahead." "Do you ever feel lonely?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Mr. John paused, studying her face. "Sometimes." "Why did you ask?" Janet shrugged, looking down at her book. "I don't know. I just feel like you understand things most people don't." Mr. John smiled. "You're more thoughtful than you let on, Janet." His words made her heart race. She felt a connection with him, something she hadn't felt with anyone else. As they talked, the conversation became more personal, and before long, Janet found herself lost in the moment. And Mr. John also slept with her. When she left the library that evening, she couldn't stop smiling. She kept the memory of their time together locked away, never going to mention it to anyone, not even her friends. 2 weeks later, it was Patricia's turn. She stayed late after Friday's inter-house sport, which was help before the close of school, hoping to run into Mr. John. Sure enough, she found him in the staff room, packing up his things. "Good evening, sir," she said, flashing her brightest smile. "Evening, Patricia," Mr. John replied, returning her smile. "You're still here?" he asked. "I was helping with cleaning the environment," she said. "What about you?" "Just finishing up some work," Mr. John said, gesturing to the pile of papers on his desk. Patricia walked over to him, pretending to look at the papers. "You work too hard, sir. You should learn to have fun." Mr. John laughed. "And you should learn to focus on your studies." "I can do both," Patricia said playfully. Mr. John shook his head, still smiling. "You're trouble and very funny." "And you like it," she replied, her voice teasing. Mr. John raised an eyebrow, but didn't deny it. Their conversation continued, and the playful banter soon turned into something more. Mr. John also slept with her in the staff room since the school was now empty. That evening, Patricia felt like she had finally gotten what she wanted. She left the staff room feeling victorious, convinced that Mr. John cared about her more than anyone else. She never told Binta or Janet about what had happened. To her, it was a special moment with him. One day, while returning from class, the girls saw Mr. John with another student in the school library. And from the look of things, Duro was asking the girl out. Out of anger, they decided to set Mr. John up so he would leave since he is not faithful as he seemed. The trio decided to approach their plan like they always did, with precision and coordination. Binta pretended to need extra tutoring after class. She stayed late in the empty classroom, acting overly friendly with Mr. John. Janet took it a step further by writing anonymous love letters, which she slipped into Mr. John's bag, making it appear as though he was encouraging inappropriate behavior. Patricia hid her phone in the staff room one afternoon, hoping to record a conversation that could be twisted against him. "Once we get this evidence, he's finished," Patricia said confidently. At first, everything seemed to go as planned. Binta made sure to stay late after school one evening and recorded herself in the classroom with Mr. John, having a nice time together. She wanted to capture him saying something incriminating. But when she played the recording back later, there was only silence. Not even her own voice was audible. "This doesn't make sense," Binta muttered, replaying the recording over and over. Janet's plan seemed to work at first. She placed them in Mr. John's bag, expecting him to react. But when she checked the next day, the letters were gone, vanished without a trace. She felt a cold chill run down her spine, but dismissed it as her imagination. Patricia's plan was to hide her phone in the staff room, positioning it perfectly to record Mr. John during lunch break. But when she retrieved it later, the video was distorted. The screen flickered with static, and strange whispers played in the background. "What's going on?" she asked, her hands trembling as she tried to re-watch the video. Despite their failed attempts, the girls decided to confront Mr. John directly. Binta, as the boldest of the group, accused him during one of his classes. "You think you can harass us and get away with it?" she said loudly, trying to draw attention. Mr. John looked at her calmly, his expression unreadable. "Harass you? Are you sure that's what you want to say?" He replied in a chilling tone. Binta froze. Her mind suddenly went blank, and she couldn't remember what she had planned to say. Janet and Patricia, standing nearby, also found themselves speechless. After class, they met in front of the canteen to discuss. "What happened to us? Why couldn't we speak?" Janet asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know," Binta replied, clutching her head. "I had everything planned out, but it's like I forgot." They decided to take their complaints to the principal. But when they entered the office, the same thing happened. The moment they opened their mouths to speak about Mr. John, their minds went blank. The principal, noticing their hesitation, asked, "Do you girls need help with something?" Binta stammered. We wanted to talk about something else. Never mind." The girls left the office in frustration, each of them feeling the weight of something they couldn't explain. Weeks later, the girls began noticing changes in their bodies. Each of them felt tired, nauseous, and strangely emotional. At first, they thought it was just stress, but eventually they realized the truth. They were pregnant. Benita was the first to figure it out. She stared at the pregnancy test in her hands, her heart pounding. "This can't be happening," she whispered. Janet had the same realization a few days later. "No," she said, shaking her head as tears streamed down her face. "This isn't real." Patricia, too, was shocked when she confirmed her fears. "What have I done?" she murmured. None of the girls told each other what was going on. They kept their secrets, afraid of what the others would say. But deep down, they all knew the truth. Mr. John was the father. Determined to confront Mr. John, each girl went to his apartment on separate days, only to find it empty. His belongings were gone, and the neighbors claimed no one had lived there for weeks. Confused and scared, the girls decided to report him to the school. But when they mentioned his name, the staff looked puzzled. "Mr. John," the principal said, "we don't have anyone by that name here." The girls felt their world crumble. How could no one remember Mr. John, our mathematics teacher? Mathematics teacher? That position has been vacant for months now, the principal said. How could he simply vanish? The girls were determined to find out what had happened to Mr. John. They visited the town library, searching for any clues about him. After hours of combing through old newspapers, Janet stumbled upon an article that made her blood run cold. "Benita, Patricia, come here," she whispered, her hands trembling as she held the newspaper. The headline read, "The senator's son died in a tragic accident on his way to NYSC orientation camp." Patricia grabbed the paper, her eyes wide. "This can't be true," she said. Benita began reading aloud. "John Amos, a 28-year-old graduate, tragically lost his life in a car accident 3 months ago while traveling to NYSC orientation camp. The accident occurred on the highway when his car skidded off the road and hit a tree. May his soul rest in peace." The room fell silent. "This doesn't make any sense," Benita said, her voice shaking. "We've been with him. He was here. He was real." Patricia buried her face in her hands. What does this mean? How can he be dead? The girls felt a chill run down their spines. The man they had fallen for, the man who had fathered their children, is a ghost? Desperate for answers, the girls went to the spot where Mr. John had been buried. As they stood by his grave, the wind howled and the air grew cold. Suddenly, Mr. John's ghost appeared before them. His once friendly smile was now a chilling smirk. "You played with people's lives," he said, his voice echoing. "Now you must carry the weight of your actions. Your children will remind you of what you've done. And just in case you turn new leaves, please take my children to my grieving mother in Lagos. The directions are already in your lockers." The girls begged for forgiveness, tears streaming down their faces. But Mr. John only shook his head. "This is not revenge, it's justice. Learn from this, or your suffering will continue." The girls returned home, knowing they could no longer hide their pregnancies. They told their parents the truth. The reactions were swift and harsh. Benita's father, Senator Lawal, was furious. "You've disgraced this family. Do you know how much we've sacrificed for you? And now you're pregnant with no father to show for it. What would my political opponents say?" Benita tried to explain, but her father cut her off. "I don't want to hear it. You're no longer my daughter. Pack your things and leave." Janet's mother, Mrs. Abigail, was equally angry. "Do you know what people will say? The daughter of a school board director, pregnant out of wedlock. You've ruined everything. When Janet begged for forgiveness, her mother shook her head. You've brought shame to this family. Get out of my house. Patricia's parents were no different. Her father said coldly, You've embarrassed us. We have no place for you here. Leave. The girls, now disowned by their families, leaned on each other for support. Thank you for watching. What lesson have you learned? Please subscribe to this channel so you can get captivating stories like this one.